Jordan Peterson spent decades telling millions of people how to bring order to their lives. His lectures reached audiences across the globe. His books sold in astonishing numbers. His message about discipline, responsibility, and personal growth transformed him into one of the world's most recognized psychologists. Yet behind that remarkable success lies a far more complicated story, one filled with unexpected twists, personal reinvention, and controversies that would eventually place him at the center of international debate. To understand how Jordan Peterson became one of the most influential and divisive public figures of the modern era, we have to go back to where it all began. Jordan Burnt Peterson was born on June 12, 1962, in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Although he was born in the provincial capital, much of his childhood unfolded in the quiet town of Fairview, a place far removed from the attention he would later receive. Life there was simple. The community was small, close-knit, and deeply rooted in traditional values. His parents believed education offered the best path to success. His mother, Beverly Peterson, worked as a librarian, spending her days surrounded by books and knowledge. His father, Walter Peterson, was a schoolteacher whose calm, structured personality left a lasting impression on the family. Their home wasn't particularly political or outspoken. Instead, it revolved around learning, discipline, and responsibility. Jordan also grew up with a modest Christian background. Religion existed in the household, but it wasn't forced upon him. Faith was simply part of everyday life. Still, even as a child, Peterson displayed a restless curiosity. He constantly questioned ideas that other people accepted without hesitation. Rather than taking things at face value, he wanted explanations. He wanted certainty. He wanted meaning. That desire would shape the rest of his life. By the time he reached his early teenage years, Peterson had already developed a serious interest in politics. At just 13 years old, he joined Canada's new Democratic Party. Most teenagers at that age were focused on sports, school, or hobbies. Peterson, however, found himself fascinated by questions involving fairness, government, power, and society. He wasn't satisfied with simply supporting the party from the sidelines. He wanted to become actively involved. Remarkably, while still in his teens, he even campaigned for a leadership role within the local party organization. Although he narrowly lost the election, the experience revealed something important. People noticed him. Even at a young age, he possessed the confidence to speak publicly and defend his beliefs. His growing political interests also introduced him to influential thinkers and community leaders who encouraged intellectual debate. But politics wasn't the only area where Peterson began asking difficult questions. Religion soon became another. During confirmation classes, Peterson challenged many of the answers presented to him. He questioned biblical stories. He asked about evolution. He wanted to understand how faith could coexist with scientific evidence. The responses he received left him unsatisfied. Instead of strengthening his beliefs, those conversations gradually pushed him away from organized religion. By the end of his teenage years, he no longer viewed religion as a convincing explanation for the world. Instead, he embraced logic, science, and rational thinking. To Peterson, reason appeared stronger than tradition. This marked one of the earliest turning points in his intellectual journey. He increasingly believed that human beings should seek truth through careful thinking rather than unquestioned belief. Ironically, many years later, religion would once again become central to his work, but from an entirely different perspective. After graduating from high school in 1979, Peterson didn't immediately pursue psychology. Instead, he enrolled at Grande Prairie Regional College, where he studied political science alongside English literature. The decision made perfect sense given his interests at the time. He remained fascinated by political systems and how societies functioned. He even imagined one day becoming a corporate lawyer. Law seemed like the ideal profession for someone interested in influence, debate, and public life. It promised financial security while allowing him to engage with complicated political and social issues. Everything appeared to be moving toward that future. Then one book changed everything. While attending college, Peterson read George Orwell's The Road to Wigan Pier. The experience profoundly affected him. The book explored poverty, politics, and social inequality, but but it also examined how ideology could distort people's thinking. Peterson found himself questioning many of the political assumptions he had previously accepted. He realized that even movements claiming to pursue justice could sometimes become driven by resentment rather than compassion. That realization shook his confidence. For perhaps the first time, he began doubting the ideological certainty that had guided him since adolescence. Instead of becoming more politically committed, Peterson became more skeptical. He started asking deeper questions. Why do people become attached to certain beliefs? What causes ordinary individuals to support destructive systems? How can intelligent people convince themselves that harmful ideas are actually good? Those questions would eventually lead him towards psychology. After completing his degree in political science in 1982, Peterson decided to travel throughout Europe. The journey proved transformative. Rather than simply sightseeing, he visited locations connected to some of history's darkest events. He explored places scarred by war, dictatorship, and unimaginable suffering. Standing in those historic locations forced him to confront disturbing questions about human nature. How could ordinary people become participants in horrific acts? What psychological forces allowed entire societies to embrace destructive ideologies? Political science could explain governments and institutions. It could describe systems, but it couldn't fully explain individual behavior. Peterson became increasingly convinced that understanding the human mind was the key to answering those questions. When he returned to Canada, he made a decision that surprised many people around him. He started over. Instead of continuing down his original academic path, Peterson enrolled once again at university, this time studying psychology. It wasn't a small adjustment. It represented a complete change in direction. He devoted himself to understanding personality, behavior, motivation, emotion, and the hidden psychological forces that shape human decisions. By 1984, he had completed his psychology degree. His new passion was unmistakable. Rather than studying governments, he wanted to understand individuals. Rather than analyzing political systems, he wanted to examine the mind itself. This decision ultimately changed the course of his entire career. Peterson's academic ambitions soon took him to McGill University, one of Canada's most respected research institutions. There he focused on clinical psychology and conducted research into alcoholism and behavioral disorders. His work explored why some individuals appeared especially vulnerable to addiction. One of his most significant research interests involved the children of alcoholic parents. He discovered that many experienced unusually high levels of stress and struggled with planning, decision-making, and emotional regulation, even if they never developed alcoholism themselves. The findings suggested that vulnerability often existed long before addiction became visible. Alcohol temporarily reduced psychological tension, making dependence even more likely. For Peterson, these discoveries reinforced an important idea. Human behavior wasn't simply a matter of choice. People's experiences, biology, and emotional struggles shaped their decisions in powerful ways. This understanding would later influence many of his public lectures about responsibility, suffering, and personal development. As Peterson continued his research, another pattern emerged. The same psychological principles he observed in individuals seemed to appear within societies. He noticed similarities between personal chaos and political instability. He began connecting psychology with mythology, history, religion, philosophy, and literature. Rather than treating these subjects separately, Peterson believed they all explored the same fundamental questions. How do people create meaning? How do they face fear? Why do civilizations rise and fall? These ideas gradually became the foundation of his life's work. In the early 1990s, Peterson accepted a teaching position at Harvard University. For many academics, securing a position at Harvard represented the pinnacle of professional achievement. Peterson embraced the opportunity with remarkable enthusiasm. His lectures quickly gained a reputation unlike those of most university professors. Students weren't simply memorizing theories. They were challenged to think deeply about responsibility, morality, identity, and purpose. His classroom became known for passionate discussions that stretched far beyond traditional psychology. Many students later described those lectures as life-changing experiences. Peterson possessed an unusual ability to combine scientific research with mythology, literature, religion, and philosophy into a single conversation. His teaching style was intense, emotional, and intellectually demanding. Students didn't merely attend his classes, they remembered them. That growing reputation would eventually extend far beyond Harvard's campus. After establishing himself at Harvard University, Jordan Peterson reached another major milestone in his career. He accepted a position at the University of Toronto, where he would spend years balancing academic research with real-world clinical practice. Unlike many professors who focused exclusively on teaching, Peterson continued working directly with patients. Each week, he met individuals struggling with anxiety, addiction, depression, trauma, and relationship problems. These weren't abstract psychological theories discussed in classrooms. They were real people facing real challenges. Listening to their experiences deeply influenced the way Peterson viewed human behavior. He became increasingly convinced that personal responsibility, meaning, and resilience were essential for overcoming life's hardships. The lessons he learned in his clinical office gradually found their way into his university lectures. Students quickly noticed that Peterson's classes felt different. He rarely relied on simple textbook explanations. Instead, he combined psychology with philosophy, mythology, religion, literature, and neuroscience. His lectures often explored timeless questions. Why do people suffer? How should they respond to tragedy? What gives life meaning? His energetic speaking style kept students engaged for hours. Rather than delivering information, he challenged audiences to rethink the way they understood themselves and the world around them. Long before becoming an internet celebrity, Peterson had already developed the communication style that would later make him famous. During the late 1990s, Peterson brought years of research together in his first major book. Published in 1999, Maps of Meaning, The Architecture of Belief became the intellectual foundation for nearly everything he would later teach. The book wasn't written as a typical self-help guide. Instead, it explored how stories, myths, religion, psychology, and history help people create order in an uncertain world. Peterson argued that ancient myths weren't simply fictional tales. They contained symbolic lessons that helped human beings navigate fear, uncertainty, and chaos. At the center of his philosophy stood one recurring idea. Human life constantly moves between order and chaos. Order represents stability, security, and the familiar. Chaos represents uncertainty, danger, and the unknown. According to Peterson, true meaning exists where those two forces meet. Although the book attracted attention within academic circles, it remained largely unknown to the wider public. That would eventually change. More than a decade later, Peterson made a decision that he gradually improved the quality of his recordings. Video titles became clearer. Editing became more polished. The channel evolved from a simple archive into a professional educational platform. Unlike many online personalities chasing short viral clips, Peterson focused on long-form discussions. His lectures encouraged viewers to spend hours exploring complex ideas rather than consuming quick entertainment. That unusual approach turned out to be remarkably successful. People didn't just watch his videos once. They returned repeatedly. Algorithms rewarded that engagement, helping his audience grow even faster. Before long, millions of people had discovered his work. Then came the moment that completely changed his public identity. In 2016, the Canadian government introduced Bill C-16. The legislation added gender identity and gender expression to existing human rights protections. Peterson publicly criticized the proposal, arguing that it could eventually lead to compelled speech by forcing people to use specific gender pronouns. He released a series of YouTube videos explaining his concerns. Those videos spread rapidly across social media. Almost overnight, Peterson went from being a respected psychology professor to one of the most talked-about public figures in Canada. Supporters praised him as someone willing to defend free speech. Critics argued that he had misunderstood the legislation and was spreading unnecessary fear. Legal experts maintained that the bill was designed to strengthen protections against discrimination rather than criminalize accidental misuse of pronouns. Despite those disagreements, The debate quickly grew far beyond the details of the legislation itself. University campuses soon became the center of the controversy. Protests erupted during Peterson's public appearances. Student groups, activists, and faculty members openly challenged his views. Supporters gathered in equally large numbers to defend him. Television networks covered the demonstrations. Newspapers published opinion pieces. Social media amplified every confrontation. What had begun as a legal disagreement evolved into a much larger cultural debate about free speech, identity, and political correctness. Peterson suddenly found himself at the heart of one of the most polarizing discussions of the decade. Regardless of whether people agreed with him or not, his name became impossible to ignore. Ironically, the controversy accelerated his popularity. Millions who had never heard of Jordan Peterson before now searched for his interviews and lectures. His YouTube audience expanded dramatically. Book sales increased. Public speaking invitations poured in from around the world. He became a regular guest on podcasts, television programs, and international debates. Many admired his willingness to defend unpopular opinions.